Do you feel okay on a day-to-day basis? Like, not even good. Good is great. But do you feel okay regularly? A lot of AuDHD and otherwise multiply neurodivergent people do not feel good on a regular basis. Then, if you're trying to get help, a lot of the information out there is pretty dire. Like, great, all the trauma changed my brain for the worse, and my brain is naturally not great at a lot of what's required to survive in this society. If you do get help, and if the therapy works, and if you have people in your life who do a lot of support and care, this is where I'm at in life, by the way. So, yes, I have a lot of those things that feel like faraway goals for a lot of us. But here's what happens. Even with longer periods of feeling okay, there will be these shitty patches cyclically where I'm just like, am I totally fucking up everything? And is life actually terrible, terrible garbage? Which is actually beside the general existential angst I feel a lot of the time anyway. We all look for reasons when we feel bad, and there are a lot of surface level reasons that are easy to see. There are world and structural and institutional reasons. There are trauma reasons and possibly built in neurodivergence reasons, though the reason I say possibly is because I do have one big why to share for at least me and a lot of people I work with, why a lot of those bad days still happen. Our sensory needs are not being met. There are two sides of this, and most of us are only paying attention to one of them. We've heard about removing sensory irritations and protecting ourselves from sensory overwhelm. Yes, that's incredibly important. The other side is experiencing sensory pleasure and having our autistic joy needs met, which is in large part a physical sensation. And learning to feel safe enough to let the intensity of those feelings actually play out in the body. I truly cannot emphasize this enough. If your sensory needs are not met, no amount of external change or support will make you feel good on that moment to moment, day to day basis. Yes, we get some initial brain chemicals at first from achieving mastery, finishing goals, making things, connecting with people, building the life we want to build. Those are all great. But I'm here to say I have achieved quite a bit, especially relative to how fucked up my childhood was. And I have I think, a naturally fairly optimistic personality, and I will still have a shitty day if my sensory needs are not being met. So, what are sensory needs? In short, they're everything the body and brain need to achieve homeostasis, which is arguably the main goal of the body as a whole and all of its systems, is to be able to return to that balance. As monotropic people, we may have a more narrow band of what our body and brain consider acceptable in order to meet those needs. For example, autistic people may have, some of us may have more trouble regulating our body temperature, meaning the physical processes that automatically regulate temperature. So, our sensory needs may include making sure we don't get too hot or too cold because the body may not be able to compensate as well or as quickly as a lot of other bodies. So, the sensory need there would be something that heats us up or cools us down as needed. This is my personal battle all day, every day, because I overheat very quickly. And before I had testosterone and before I was able to keep muscle on, I was the opposite and I was freezing all the time. Another one that I read about that I think is very interesting is the eyes, the pupils of autistic people may not contract as quickly in response to light. So that could be one factor that makes us more sensitive to light is we're exposed to brighter light and our eyes don't contract as quickly. So the sensory need there would be wearing sunglasses or a hat, avoiding overhead lighting, avoiding fluorescent lighting, using lights on dimmer switches, etc. So those are examples in the first big category of sensory needs, removing or ameliorating things that are irritating or overwhelming to our senses. And a big subcategory there is pain, because a lot of us have chronic health stuff, chronic pain, flare ups, various health issues. And if you have not yet done so, I recommend looking into what disabled people suggest as accommodations because there are so many great ideas out there for little stuff that just makes all of this sensory stuff easier. And if you have thought about this before and thinking about your sensory needs is like down your to-do list somewhere, I strongly suggest that you start prioritizing it, even if it's just for a few minutes a day. It's easy to ignore sensory signals, especially if you have low interoception, if you have alexithymia, and that can it just takes a lot more for us. I have one little example for people who are watching on video, which is these hair clips that I just got that are changing my life. Like I would have my hair kind of in my face and I would just always be thinking about it. It was so annoying, but I just didn't necessarily register how annoying it was until I put the clip in, and then I was like, oh my God, this is fixing everything. Like this is making my entire life so much better. So the hair clips are an example of something where, yeah, the thing was annoying me, but I didn't necessarily think of a solution. It was just super low grade irritation. And we experience a lot of those, but they layer on top of each other. They build up, they cause that cognitive allostatic load where the body is having a hard time, basically. And if those things really build up, that's when we're having meltdowns, shutdowns. It's what makes everything else harder. It makes it harder to initiate tasks. Like a lot of the things that we associate with ADHD, and I think also with demand avoidance, are made a lot worse by and sometimes triggered by our sensory needs not being met. So it's this really, really foundational thing. And I have another kind of silly example, which is I've been trying to listen to my body sooner when I get a signal instead of just ignoring it. And when I originally jotted down that bullet point, like to say that, when I was writing about this, I realized that my knee felt weird and I needed to stand up. So I stood up and I've been really been working on adjusting right away, which is actually really important for not injuring myself with hypermobility. The other one is trying to go to the bathroom the first time I think of it. I'm nowhere near that goal yet. I still will put that off, but it's part of this general thing for me of paying more attention to my body and listening to those signals. And it's kind of like encouraging those signals because they really are trying to help me, even if they feel like an annoying interruption to my monotropism in the moment. There are also really good reasons that we have trouble figuring out our own preferences, which I will get into in next week's episode. Another issue with sensory sensitivity is sometimes inputs that bother us a lot don't sound real to people who don't have that awareness and they just don't get it. So, one example is visceral hypersensitivity, where you can feel your internal organs and feel their processes and functioning, and then that functioning can feel uncomfortable, distracting, or even painful. Another example, when I was a kid, a sibling of mine came to my mom and said, there's water in my mouth, and every time I swallow, it just comes right back. Yeah, that's saliva. And they were bothered by it, right? This bothered them. I think in this case, learning more about it helped them. But we can have these sensory sensitivities that just haven't occurred to the people around us, and people don't believe us, or it feels like they don't take us seriously. And what I'm hoping for all of us is that we can believe ourselves and take ourselves seriously. And that's kind of what I meant too with myself, like listening to signals the first time, trying to do things the first time. And it's because I'm trying to take myself more seriously so that when it comes to telling other people what I need or holding a boundary, these kind of like more difficult, potentially relational skills, that I've been practicing it with myself and taking care of myself and listening to myself and taking my body seriously. And then when I do that over and over and my sensory needs are being met better, that improves my life experience and makes everything easier. I find it makes things easier. So the other side of this, the other big thing I want to talk about today is what I'm just going to call the additive side of sensory needs. So adding in things instead of taking out things. So in meeting our intensity needs, meeting our monotropic needs, both of which I'll get into more later in this. I have this series of like 10 episodes that are all interwoven, and I think this is number 3. Yeah. So these are all, I'll be getting into these things more. My current take on this basically is that my sensory needs, including my existential needs, are not met by just eating and shitting and sleeping, like taking care of my body. My interest based nervous system needs to deeply engage with my interests. It does not feel optional. And just like if I ignore going to having to go pee, if I ignore these additive sensory needs, my brain will get its needs met. It will deep dive on something for a day or two, whether or not it's actually connected to my real interests, whether or not it's anything I actually care about. It could be completely unimportant, but my brain will get that need met. So, like, for example, I will binge a TV show that isn't even that good. Uh, I will finish a book that's actually stressing me out and I don't want to read right now. I will deep clean something completely unimportant. So basically, my monotropic sensory needs that need to deep dive, to do the focus, to be engaged in interests, it's going to get met. My body's going to meet that need. So what I've basically found is I may as well do it more intentionally and do it in ways that fit into and make sense with the rest of my life. And again, I'm not perfect on this front, right? This is very much a part of my current process is being more aware of this. So it's noticing. I love the phrase noticing and naming that I'm just seeing, okay, I feel the need for intensity. I feel the need for a deep dive. And that can coincide with still needing lower irritation as well, right? Like I might need to be in a quiet space. I might need to be alone. I might need to be under a weighted blanket or comfortable, and then do the intensity or interest deep dive. So this is not, one or the other. These are not actually in opposition. I think they largely go together to a large degree. And a couple other things I've noticed, I'm calling these sensory needs because they feel so intensely necessary for me, are needs for progress and mastery. And I don't just mean like bullshit capitalism productivity stuff. I need to do things I'm good at, and I need to be able to sink into those and deeply enjoy them. So that goes with the monotropic needs. I need to feel like I'm making progress on at least one thing that ties into my most cherished values. I need to feel connected to other people. And even though I think my social needs are relatively low compared to most people in terms of amount of time, there's like a physical component to that sensory need because my body will start to complain if I don't get it met. And there's a particularly vicious cycle that can happen here. We've probably all experienced this many times. Um, I might focus for a while, say, on the physical side of this. So I will be wearing earplugs and sunglasses when I go out. I will be limiting my social time. I'll be sleeping okay, usually not great. I'm not a great sleeper, but I'll be getting enough rest. I'll be wearing comfortable clothes. I'll have manageable work. It's like if I'm really working on all this stuff, I'll be meeting these visible sensory needs. But if I'm just puttering on the surface and I never get to go deep, if I never get those monotropic sensory needs met, and if I'm constantly transitioning between things, so again, monotropic needs like not getting to have long chunks that are interrupted. I need some relatively unstructured time, at least occasionally. If I don't get that, my body gets pissed. This is not just a mental experience. And so then the vicious cycle part of that is that all of a sudden I don't want to do the physical stuff anymore. I don't want to keep up with the physical habits. And I start staying up late. I start eating potato chips. I start drinking more alcohol than I would like. I start pushing off social plans, canceling social plans, even that I kind of do want to do or that I probably would enjoy, because I just feel like I can't make myself be a person. And that is a lot of what I mean when I say that no matter how much of the external stuff is set up to support you, if you're not getting any monotropic flow or autistic joy or that deep body pleasure of, I think of it as lining things up in my brain, like we lined up toys as a kid. If you're not getting any of those additive sensory needs met, your brain and body are going to be giving you alarm signals that there is something deeply wrong. Just like if you don't eat or don't go to the bathroom or, don't sleep, like they're very, to me, they feel the same. They're a very similar type of alarm, basically, from the brain. And that's because if our brains are not able to achieve the homeostasis they're trying to achieve, they will send out alarm signals and it makes us feel bad. And ironically, for our strange and intense brains, sometimes we achieve that balance, that homeostasis, by actually being really intense and letting ourselves be, I think of it as just absolutely feral for a few days, just kind of eating whatever. And this is a terrible example because obviously I would never suggest this to anyone, but when I was writing my composing my senior recital in college, I forgot to eat for 3 days. And what's ridiculous about that is that I wasn't feeling hunger. So I wasn't pushing away signals. I just wasn't getting signals. But it's because the sensory pleasure of the monotropic deep dive and the mastery and the progress all felt so incredibly good that I just didn't have sensory signals of hunger. Again, terrible example. I'm careful not to do stuff like that now, but the sensory pleasure can be so intense, it can really almost take the other sensory needs offline for a while. So, at the same time, if I take really good care of the body, I can still feel like shit in a given day or by the end of the day. If every time an experience of autistic joy is coming up in my body or I want to deep dive, if I cut that off and I don't let myself have that experience, I'll still feel bad. And a word of caution here, if anybody needs this, is this does not mean to push the gas pedal all the way to the floor in every single area of your life or to pursue all of your interests, as hard as you can at once, just because it feels good. This is a bit of a balance thing. And in keeping with the monotropic needs thing, sometimes just picking one area to focus on first when it comes to sensory needs will be a helpful starting place. That said, moderation in this case, because, for example, one of the best ways I support my own brain now is if I'm just not sleeping, if my psychomotor overexcitability is at a 10 and I just can't sleep, I will just get up and I will let myself do something interesting. And this happened to me a couple days ago. I slept for 4 hours and I was just awake. So I got up and I let myself take a nap later. And weirdly, my brain was actually in a really good mood that day, and I got a lot done that day. So that was like my brain needed to meet these additive needs of doing interesting things and deep diving and writing more than it needed basic sleep. And that kind of cyclical energy is very common for me, and so I've built my life around that. And again, I've seen that pattern in a lot of ADHDers, especially when you throw in the intensity, which you may call giftedness, but that extreme intensity side. We often have these really cyclical experiences with sleep, with creativity, and it's not mental illness, it's just how my body works. One other thing to throw in here is if you've heard the term dopamine binging, my guess would be that what I'm describing is part of what's going on there. The brain just trying, the mind body system trying to get these sensory pleasure needs met, often through hyperfocus because it meets some of those needs. Personally, I don't use the term dopamine binging because I think it's part of a deeply flawed model that over focuses on and flattens the role of dopamine. And there's a related idea I've heard people talk about dopamine fasting. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. Having looked into it, it's not going to do what people think it's going to do. But I know this is a term people use, and someone mentioned it in my community, so I wanted to throw it in because yes, I think what I'm describing, the brain trying to get these needs met, it will get these needs met. It's going to do it. So, again, may as well build in the monotropic deep dives and the interests a little bit more as possible. And I want to wrap up with a quote I wrote down from Danielle Aubin on TikTok. She is an amazing AuDHD therapist. She's been a guest on the show twice, once earlier in her journey and once more recently. And what she said was, when the autistic burnout hits and the main skill you lost was the ability to abandon yourself without debilitating psychological or physical pain. The main skill you lost was the ability to abandon yourself without debilitating psychological or physical pain. That hit me so hard because we talk about burnout, depression, skill regression, after people discover that they're autistic, etc. Obviously, a lot of us are experiencing those things. And I think it's possible that you're not only experiencing burnout or skill regression, but that basically your sensory needs are more present to you now. You can see them, they're more in your awareness. I think it's kind of like when you learn a word and then you see it everywhere, the reticular activating system. you know what that word means now, and you can't just not know what it means. You're not just going to not get it when you hear it. So that idea that you lose, I felt this way too, that it's like yeah, I can't abandon myself without pain. It's harder to make myself stick with something that's hurting me. And I'm much more aware now of how much stuff hurts me and how sensitive I am and how intense a lot of my needs are. And if your brain and body are speaking up more about those needs and giving you more signals, it might feel really bad in a lot of ways because now it's like, great, I'm like now noticing that I can't push through anymore in social settings without like, drinking heavily, which I don't want to do. I can't I was going to say I can't make myself push through to do a lot of work. That's not true. But there are days when my brain feels good and I can just do it, right? So that's not about forcing myself on a bad brain day. And when I do try to force myself, if there's something I have to do and I'm having a really, really bad day, I have to meet those simple sensory needs first. Like I have to, for me, take a nap or, at least have some horizontal time with a weighted blanket. Like I have to regulate my body more in order to be able to do even one task. So again, this all kind of comes back to how foundational these things are, how foundational sensory needs are. And if you're experiencing anything along the lines of what I'm talking about, especially this, like, yeah, I feel the skill regression. I feel, if that quote from Danielle resonated with you, make sensory needs a priority. And I don't say prescriptive stuff like that a lot. I often say, this could be a good thing to think about or work on. But if you are experiencing the stuff I've been talking about today, make sensory needs a priority because also I'm bad at prioritizing like explicitly. So sometimes it helps to hear, oh yeah, this is the priority. This is actually really important and foundational. And it will make everything else easier if your sensory needs are taken care of. And that's a huge part of what I mean when I use the phrase feel better first. Taking care of your sensory needs and the things that are bothering you, it will lessen the frequency and intensity of meltdowns and shutdowns. It will give you more energy. And this can be quite subtle. I don't mean, disability just goes away or, if you have chronic fatigue or something. I'm not saying it's that much energy to just like overcome that, but lower cognitive load, lower sensory irritation load, it does reclaim some energy. And then hopefully, ideally, you get to have that energy for yourself. So I guess the other kind of thing I would suggest that you really lean into along with this is to me it feels like selfishness. I will again get to this more in I think next week's episode actually that like focusing on and meeting my own needs feels like selfishness and my brain thinks that is very unsafe and I should not do that. But if I'm reclaiming some energy from less shame, less guilt, meeting my sensory needs better, and I'm not as tired and I get to reclaim some of that energy, I want to save some of that energy for these other sensory needs, for monotropic deep dives, for my interests, for, being able to do the things I want to do. And I don't mean being productive. I don't mean, in my case, composing or writing poetry or, I don't mean production and I don't mean completing things that you feel like you need to do. I mean pleasure. So the pleasure, the delight, the autistic joy stuff, being able to reclaim some energy and then actually use that for what actually feels good to us, not what we think should feel good, not what we used to like and just doesn't land the same anymore. Other examples of things that can bring in this pleasure, stimming, obviously engaging in our interests, info dumping with safe people, so getting to unmask somewhat, connecting with people who we feel like get us, and for me, exploring my own needs and desires can be a part of this, but that can also have its own stress. So again, I will get to that more next week. And I wanted to share one more little story. Yesterday, I was drawn to a radio because I heard one of my favorite pieces on it, a Schubert piece. And it's one of the pieces that made me want to be a composer as a child. So I was listening and I started crying. And then it turns out it was a Horowitz recording. He's a pianist. So, of course, I started crying. He's just incredibly masterful. And I just stood there, like, next to this radio, crying and rocking a little bit and just enjoying the piece for the 7 minutes or however long it was. And I did not try to lessen the intensity. I didn't try to stop myself from crying. I just let my body have that sensory pleasure and that intensity pleasure. And yeah, it actually was kind of a lot sensorially, and it made me feel a little bit tired and worn out. I had one more call later that day, and I felt that I was a little tired from like the intensity of that experience. I needed some time to be alone with myself, but it felt like a reclamation of my body, my pleasure, my intensity as something that I get to have and enjoy for me. I didn't have to save that energy for masking, later on a call or a social plan that night, which I ended up opting out of because I just needed to rest, basically. And that's fine, but I wanted to save that energy for myself and my own deep desires and experiences and things that feel good to me. It's also okay if you don't know right now what you want and you don't know what feels good to you. Again, I'll get to that a lot more in next week's episode because there are good reasons that we don't learn how to identify what we like. And that's actually, I think, the norm for us. I think for a lot of multiply neurodivergent people, a lot of us don't know what we like. So it's okay to start wherever you're at, improve your sensory experiences, even just a little bit, even in subtle ways, even a few minutes a day. And when you do land on what works for you, it usually not always, sometimes it's subtle, but it usually will feel so good that it feels easier to keep doing it. You're drawn to it. It feels good. And so the body wants to do that. And that's again, if it's in that pleasurable range and not just what you think you're supposed to be doing. So asking yourself, what does my body actually want? What feels good? What feels a little better? What feels less annoying? And we have autistic bodies have an enormous capacity for joy and enjoyment. But most of us were raised to ignore that or hide it as shameful and mask it. That's part of what masking is masking our joy as well. So I'm here to say, let's reclaim that capacity for delight because we deserve to enjoy the life we have now, even if there are things we want to change or move towards. I get a lot of delight from watching puffin burrow cams, for example, just little cameras and puffin burrows. You deserve to feel okay. You deserve to have your sensory needs met. You deserve to save some of that energy for yourself and for your pleasure and not just put it all into work or other people. And yeah, we're all going to have bad days sometimes, but when our sensory needs are met, we have a lot more average and okay days that don't feel so bad. And I still think the great days, like the amazing days, are unpredictable and inconsistent for me. So I just enjoy them when they happen. But otherwise, I'm honestly pretty good with having like okay and content-ish a lot of the time because it's a lot better than how I used to feel most of the time, especially when I was depressed for long periods. So again, if any of this resonates, I suggest making sensory needs a priority for yourself, even if it's a few minutes a day, or just starting to notice what's annoying and what your body seems to be asking for. And if you want direct help figuring that out, uh, neurodivergent community in general, neurodivergent people are great to talk to. Sometimes you notice what's annoying, but you don't necessarily know what the fix is, basically. Or there's so much that's annoying, you're not sure where to start. So talking to other neurodivergent people, looking at, maybe neurodivergent communities online or in person if you have that. And then also if you need like more intensive help for that, it is one of the main ways that I help people as a coach, especially early on, is this meeting sensory needs. So I'll include a link to share what you might need if you want to reach out. And whether or not you work with me, I will give you my best recommendation based on what you share. I love sharing resources. And of course, there's the AuDHD Flourishing podcast with over 100 episodes and this current series of about, I think, 10 episodes that all weave together and cover a lot of foundational information about feeling better. And that series, just so you know, starts with the interview with Joe about AuDHD therapy, which I think was episode 102. I'm also experimenting with making this a YouTube video as well. just this episode, and not caring about how I look. So I wasn't thinking about my facial expressions that much. That is part of my own unmasking journey. And I hope this is helpful, and I'll talk to you next week.